Chapter 14, Scotland and Norway. Tom Sather met me at the Perth railway station, and we jeeped over to Area P, the OSS name for Dalnagler Castle, located in the foothills of the Grampian Mountains, about 10 miles from the town of Blairgowrie. It had been selected because the surrounding countryside was thought to be excellent for ski training and mountain climbing, but whoever chose that particular piece of real estate didn't know a thing about castles. Dalnagler may have been quite the spot when Bonnie Prince Charlie roamed the land, but by the time the Norso group arrived, it looked as though it had fallen flat and then been reassembled by a gang of lunatic apprentice stonemasons. When I showed up, there was still some snow around, but not enough for any more ski training, which was unfortunate since Major Colby was able to throw his physical conditioning program into high gear. Long runs and endless hikes under full packs were the order of the day every day, and I had a rough time of it the first week. The rest of our time was devoted to firing various weapons and blowing up everything in sight on demolition problems, with Rocky Farnsworth proving time and again he was a master of the latter art. There were a few attempts at organized games, but after the first rugby match compiled an all too impressive list of walking wounded, the Major ordered us to stick to volleyball. Since there was only one ball and a single net, play was limited to less than half the group at a time. This bored the other half, so a soccer game was arranged, with strict rules as to body contact. The only suitable terrain was about a mile from the castle. We all trooped down there one afternoon. A field was lined out, goals were erected for after Rocky had blown post holes in the frozen ground. Sides were chosen, everybody made bets, and the game started. Play was hardly the caliber you'd find at the Olympics, but the men loved it. Just as things were getting exciting, a flock of sheep came down an adjoining hillside and wandered into the fray. While we were trying to shoo them off the field, a gorgeous collie dog came bouncing into view, and right behind him, the angriest shepherd in Kingdom Come. He looked old enough to have fought with Robert the Bruce, and he hadn't lost his touch. His initial explosion dealt with the damage we had done to the pasture. Then he roared, "You're faring my sheep, and them about to be lambing. Get off my land." The Norso group, every man a veteran of guerrilla warfare in France, shifted their feet uneasily and looked to the officers for guidance. Rocky whispered to me, "We got him outnumbered 50-1, if you don't count the dog. I don't think it's going to be enough." It wasn't, not by a long shot. The ancient Scot suddenly lifted his staff shoulder high, shouted to the collie, and the two of them charged straight at us. Our retreat was rapid and disorderly, but highly effective. A minute later, the old boy had his pasture all to himself. He also had the only soccer ball. Major Colby, who had been watching the game through binoculars from the front lawn of the castle, met us as we trudged back. "My heroes, turn in your gear. I'll send him and his dog to Norway." The men trained hard 6 days a week and were in corking good shape because of it. Those who wanted to could go into Balgowrie on Saturday nights. The local populace wasn't hostile, but they weren't exactly friendly. The pub was owned and operated by a family named Hall. One visit convinced me they were no kin of mine. The only other trip to town came at Bill Colby's insistence. It was so cold at Dalnagler that I'd let my hair grow to keep my brains from freezing solid. So did practically everyone else, and it finally reached the point where a person coming up behind the Norso group would think he was overtaking a herd of yaks. As the weather grew warmer, above 20 degrees, the Major ordered us to get haircuts. One of the men promptly claimed a knowledge of barbering and pulled out a pair of scissors and some battered clippers out of his barracks bag to back it. He proved to be the kind who leaves nothing above the neck but ears, and maybe only one of them. I decided to take my chances in Blairgowrie. The barber there may or may not have been related to the shepherd, but I came back looking like a survivor of the Deerfield massacre. From then on, most of us stuck with our comrade, and he eventually became passing fair. During the second week in March, Bill Colby asked me to get a cup of coffee and come to his room after the evening meal. We were close friends, and he didn't waste any time on formalities. "We've been alerted. I'm going to tell the others tonight, but first I have some news for you. The Norso group has been split into two sections. I'm in command of the first, you're in command of the second. The operation will be in 2 phases. I'll take my unit in, then you bring yours in." I stared at my cup, and Bill knew what I was thinking. You're not being left behind, and you're not being left out of anything. Headquarters has decided to send half of us in at a time. There's much less chance of losing the whole group that way, and it also provides for reinforcements which may well be needed. Why me in command of the second section? Why not Sather? You know Tom's the best skier we've got. Besides being a Norwegian American who speaks fluent German, Rocky's the best demolitions man any of us will ever see. Blaine's a good skier and has been with this bunch for more than a year. I have to leave one officer to command the second section. You're the logical choice. Swell. I didn't expect you to like it, but I do expect you to understand. You can't ski, you missed a good deal of the training, and you're the junior officer in the group. I can't make it any plainer than that. You don't have to. You look as though somebody stole your teddy bear. Don't know why I should. I ought to be used to this by now. You seem to be forgetting you'll be coming into Norway. We'll need all the help we can get. The second section will come in much sooner than you think. If it comes in at all, it'll be much sooner than I'm thinking right now. Later that evening, Colby gave all his officers a more detailed briefing. The drop will be on Lake Jevzo, east of Snasa in Nord-Trøndelag. It's frozen solid, and the underground will provide a reception party. I don't have to remind you how difficult the supply problem is. There will be 8 plane loads, each made up in self-contained units of men and supplies, each capable of independent operation in the field on skis for 40 days without help. Completely self-sufficient. He went on explaining details and issuing orders. When the briefing was over, he dismissed the others and gave me more explicit instructions regarding the second section. You'll stay here at Delnagler until I send for you. Keep up the mountain training routine. Heavy on the weapons. The men are going to be bitched off about being assigned to the second section. Don't give them a chance to grumble a morale problem into being. Work them so hard they won't have time to fret. You might be coming in at any time, so keep the section in top shape. I've been hearing about this second section all night. Who's in it? Have you made up the roster yet? Major Colby hesitated a moment, nodded, and handed me a list. Here they are, 20 all told. I'll be taking 33 with me, plus the officers. I read the names slowly. The second section was no more nor less than the second team. My compliments on your selections, with one exception. Those are the men I would have left behind. Who's the exception? Sergeant Kylo. He has the supply sergeant. He'll be more valuable back here with the supplies. I guess that figures. When do you want me to tell the men they're being left to my tender mercies? At Reveille? No, you've been given enough of a headache. I'll explain things to the second section, and I wish you'd stop looking like that. You're coming to Norway too. When I do, what I'll bring with me will be the second section in name only. The group was divided the next morning into Norso 1 and Norso 2, but it continued to train as a single unit. Most of the newly formed section realized that the men in Norso 1 were the best skiers and accepted that as the reason for the division. They didn't seem to be as perturbed about being left in reserve as they did about being left under my command. I'd been in charge of the daily run, which the men hated above all else in training, and Norso 2 shuddered at the thought of what would happen when I took over the entire program. The alert lasted for 8 days, then the Air Corps finally reported suitable flying conditions, and Norso 1 left Delnagler Castle to the accompaniment of raucous and not particularly envious farewells from Norso 2, which had been unofficially christened the Mexican Militia. I devoted the next week to making sure the men wished to God they had gone to Norway. An afternoon run and a second calisthenics period were added to the daily schedule, along with 3 unannounced night marches. Every weapon in the area was fired until it became too hot to hold, grenades were used up by the case, and each man made 2 consecutive bazooka hits or kept on shooting until he did. A reasonable facsimile of the Fort Benning tower jump was rigged up by running a cable from the roof of the castle to a tree on the far side of the lawn. The men thought this would be great fun until they found out the practice exits would be made at night with full operational equipment. Colonel Bolland showed up at Delnagler 10 days after Norso 1 had left, bringing with him the first word we received on Operation Ripe. One look at him and I knew it hadn't gone well. He didn't say anything, just handed me a brief official report. On the night of 24 March 1945, Major Colby, 2 officers, and 18 men dropped on Jevzo Lake to a reception party. 8 planes started, 4 dropped at the target, 1 person dropped personnel and loads in Sweden thinking it was over the target. 3 planes returned to the United Kingdom unsuccessful. On 31 March, a second try to get Norsel 1 in by air was made. All planes unsuccessful. 1 crashed in Orkney Islands on the return trip, killing 6 of our personnel listed below. Co-pilot, only survivor. He stated that 2 motors had failed on the Liberator bomber. I read the names of those killed in the crash. Berg, Kilness, Melland, Ottersland, Rorvik, Sundano. For some reason, I remembered that Johannes Rorvik came from Luck, Wisconsin. It was rough enough to lose 6 men, but that way. Have you heard from Major Colby? Yes. He established and is maintaining daily radio contact. The drops were bad, men and equipment scattered, a good portion of the supplies lost because the container chutes hadn't been hooked up by the air crews. And a plane load dropped in Sweden besides. Norway's no dot on the map, it's a whole country. What the hell's the matter with the Air Force? The colonel shook his head wearily before going on in his clipped military manner of speaking. Inexperienced personnel, replacements. An investigation is underway. What happens now? We're still trying to get Lieutenant Jones in with the remaining men and supplies. Major Colby is under orders to stay put until then. And Norso too? Continue training and await further orders. The men were shaken by news of the crash. Almost all of them had come into the OSS in a body from the 99th Mountain Battalion at Camp Hale, Colorado, and all told they had served together for more than 3 years. I had no choice but to work them even harder in an effort to keep their minds off it, and I had my hands full doing it. There was only one other officer at Dalnagler Castle, the area commander, and he was generally regarded as feeble-minded. There was incessant bitching, but both the morale and the condition of Norso II improved steadily, although my personal popularity didn't keep pace with either. A couple of the men were too tired one night to notice I was standing behind them in the chow line. The way the lieutenant gallops around on the runs, the son of a bitch must be half horse. You're right, and I know which half. A week after Colonel Bollin's visit, I received a hurried phone call ordering me to report to London at once. Colonel Scabo was waiting for me, his face pale and drawn with strain. More bad news, Lieutenant. Another crash, no survivors. We lost Lieutenant Jones, Sergeant Anderson, Corporal Falk, and Corporal Iverson. Their plane hit a mountain 8 kilometers from the target area. Major Colby was waiting, but they never came over. He turned and looked out the window for what seemed a long time, then picked up some papers from his desk and began reading in a tired voice. Because of the repeated failures in getting Operation Ripe into the field by air, 17 sorties flown, 4 successful, and the short periods of darkness now becoming a hazard to flying that far north, this method is not to be used again. He let the papers slip from his hand. Those are my orders. That leaves Colby in the field with 2 officers, 18 men, and less than half his supplies. Here's what we're going to try and do. Colby has been ordered to begin attacking the Norland Railway. Colonel Bolland will take the remainder of Norsel 1 by air to Sweden, then by courier to the operational area. Those 6 men made 3 attempts to get in by plane and parachute. Maybe they'll make it in on skis. He sat down heavily before continuing. If Bolland can make it through Sweden, we'll try to send your group in the same way. That's the best I can offer you. Now, continue your present training program until further orders. You can stay in London tonight if you wish and return to Area P tomorrow. Thank you, Colonel Scobble. While I was putting on my trench coat, he started talking again, but so softly it was difficult to hear. I asked them to send Ripe in 2 months ago, and they gave me the runaround about political considerations. I begged them for Norwegian pilots and British planes to fly the sorties. They turned me down cold. I told them. His voice trailed off into silence. As I closed the door of his office behind me, I realized how sorry I felt for the tired old gentleman who was the commanding officer of Operation Ripe. I saw no point in keeping the unpleasant news from Norso II. They were beginning to develop a fatalistic attitude anyway, and took it in stride. I eased up a bit on the training program after making it abundantly clear that their reign of terror would be reinstated the moment the group began to get sloppy. If by any miraculous chance we did get sent into Norway via Sweden, which I doubted very much, it would be in small units of not more than 5 men each, and there would be weeks to prepare. My plans for spending a relaxing spring in the Scottish Highlands were rudely interrupted by a phone call from Mr. Terry. Sorry your operation to Norway didn't come off, Roger. Well, there's always the CBI, although I'm sure the Japs will quit the day I start their way. They might at that. I'm calling to let you know ahead of time that we're sending you 20 Greeks. Bad connection. Thought you said 20 Greeks. I did. Now, what am I going to do with 20 Greeks? Train them. We brought them all the way from the Mediterranean theater to reinforce the Norso group. They're all veterans of OG missions into Greece, mountain combat, good men. They arrived yesterday, and we can't keep them in London. They'll get to Perth tomorrow at noon. How many officers? None. First Sergeant Strimanos is in command until you take over. I certainly do want to thank you, Mr. Terry. That's just what I need up here. 20 Greek OGs and no officers. Now, if you could just arrange to have Delnagler Castle shelled some night. Fine, Roger, fine. Call me anytime. Goodbye. First Sergeant Strimanos, all 6'5" and 240 pounds of him, brought his crew in on schedule. They were hard articles and came complete with a set of jaw-breaking names, all except the one who looked more like a Greek than any of the others. His name was Brady. I had had a few misgivings as to how the Norwegians and the Greeks would get along, but they hit it off fine from the start. I rearranged the training schedule on a competitive basis, pitting the two groups against each other in every conceivable manner. We even had map reading contests. It worked out beautifully. Colonel Scabo came up and spent a few days at Delnagler Castle. He's feeling much better about things in general, and Operation Ripe in particular. Bill Colby had managed to recruit some Norwegian underground members in the field and had somehow blasted the Tanjin Bridge on the Norland Railway in one raid and 3 kilometers of rail in a second strike. He had successfully eluded all German patrols except one, which was promptly annihilated at the cost of only 1 Norso wounded. It also looked as though Colonel Bowland and his men would be able to get in by way of Sweden, and Colonel Scobel was optimistically predicting that Norso II would follow soon. We were all aware, however, that we were rapidly running out of war. Although things on the continent were heading for a fast finish, there was still considerable speculation at headquarters as to whether or not the cracked German troops in Norway would make a last-ditch stand after the inevitable surrender of their high command in Berlin. On the outside chance that they might, plans were made for prolonged operations in Norway, with Norso II going in the moment the Germans caused trouble, followed by a full-scale Allied invasion. With such an operation at least a possibility, I looked around for ways to keep the group sharp and decided a jaunt through the British Parachute School would be just the thing. Colonel Scabo agreed, and the necessary orders were issued. Since the war in Europe was likely to end any day, the men took the news about more parachute training as proof positive that I had gone completely mad. There was no open mutiny, but remarks emanated from the mess hall, which was separated from the officers' dining room by a thin partition. Became even more uncomplimentary. He's nuts, I tell you. I have fruitcake and boots. Why would he do such a thing if he wasn't nuts? Why not? It's his last chance to kill us all. Captain Peter Leghorn almost had a stroke when I descended on STS-51 with 40 men of the unofficial rechristened Nor-Greek group. Most of them had let their beards and hair grow, the barber having gone to Norway with Major Colby, and the resultant assemblage looked as though a band of Viking raiders had joined forces with Sicilian bandits. Leghorn gasped. Jesus deliver from us from the scourge of God and his Vandals. I'm not Attila, and these fine young men are Norwegians and Greeks, not Huns. First Germans, now Norwegians and Greek. What the devil do you think I'm running here? An immigration center? On our last day at STS-51, I received orders from Colonel Scabo to bring the entire group back to London. When we arrived there, the 20 Greek Americans were transferred out to await shipment back to the States. VE Day was next, and Norso II didn't get a chance to do any dancing in the streets. We were rushed back to Area P under a 24-hour operational alert. However, the Germans in Norway quit along with their comrades in Europe, and so we sat around Delnagler Castle and waited. Colonel Scabo showed up early one morning with the news that Norso II was flying to Norway the next day, and he was going with us. Norso I had come down out of the mountains and gone to Namsos to bolster the chief of police because of the arrogant attitude of German Navy personnel there. Norso, too, was to seize Varnes airfield, which was still occupied by German military personnel, and disarm a large number of SS troops who had gathered there. We all perked up at the news. It was more of a mission than any of us expected at this stage of the game. Operation Better Late Than Never took off in 3 B-24s, but the Air Force blew it again, and my plane was the only one that made it to Varnes. Colonel Skabos wandered up the way south of Oslo, and the 3rd upheld tradition by landing in Sweden. This left me more firmly convinced than ever that most navigators were recruited from Giggle Tech. When we jumped out onto the landing strip at Varnes, the unused runways were packed with thousands of German troops. We were greeted by a reception committee of about a dozen Norwegian underground members. Fortunately, one was an excellent interpreter, equally fluent in Norwegian, German, and English. Since Colonel Skabo wasn't around, I told the interpreter to stay close by and had a short chat with the chief of the local underground. He'd evidently been expecting at least a battalion of paratroopers and seemed worried as he told me there are at least 7 battalions of Germans here. I brought 6 men with me. We'll each take a battalion. That didn't do much good, so I added the 5-man crew of my plane will be held in reserve. He was in no mood for jokes, bad or otherwise. I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I decided to have the commander of each battalion surrender to me. I stood under a brace of machine guns in the nose turret of our B-24, and the gunner was on duty. The 6 Norso men were lined up behind me with the underground Norwegians. The German officers were instructed to come up, give their name, the military designation of their unit, and the number of men. It went smoothly enough at first. The Germans marched up one by one, clicked their heels and saluted, gave the required information, then wheeled and marched back through their units. The 5th officer to do this wore one iron cross on a ribbon around his neck and another pinned over his heart. He was quite short, not much over 5 feet tall, walked with a bad limp, and had a powerful voice. After finishing the prescribed routine, he suddenly unsheathed his ceremonial dagger — all the officers were wearing them — and handed it to me hilt first, speaking loudly as he did. I heard my interpreter catch his breath. What did he say? I asked. That he has been under orders. He has been ordered to surrender, and as a soldier he must obey orders. But he and his men are like that blade, and merely have been put in a sheath. I looked at the hard features of the man standing rigidly in front of me, and wondered whether to let him have his moment. Then I remembered the Norwegian behind me, and what they'd been through for 5 years. I bent over, placed the point of the dagger on the concrete, and stamped hard on the blade. It snapped. The German started to say something, then bit his lip, spun around, and limped back to his men. I heard a sigh from one of the Norso group, and a Tommy gun bolt clicking forward slowly from the firing position. The 6th German behaved himself, and as the 7th and last marched stiffly toward me, I caught sight of the double lightning bolts on his collar. That meant SS. He was blond and good-looking, but he seemed young for the job. Before he said a word, the interpreter stepped forward and whispered in my ear. He's a lieutenant. The SS commander is a colonel. Ask him where the colonel is. The interpreter spoke, but there was no answer. The young officer grew red-faced and continued to stare straight ahead. The interpreter asked him twice more and got the same results. Ask him if the colonel is afraid of the American soldiers. He responded to that with an absolute torrent of words, and it was the interpreter's turn to redden, giving me an abridged version of it. The colonel is in his quarters. He will surrender only to an officer of equal or higher rank. He will not surrender to a lieutenant. Where are his quarters? There, he pointed to a group of houses on the edge of the field about 300 yards away. Give the lieutenant a message for the colonel. If the colonel isn't out of there in 15 minutes, his quarters will be burned to the ground with phosphorus grenades. The German lieutenant raced off across the field. I glanced at my watch, then turned to the men behind me. The Norsos seemed primed and ready, but the Norwegian underground group were having an animated discussion, during which they kept giving me horrified looks. Their leader finally stepped forward. Lieutenant Hall, I much ask of you to give it the other thought about Colonel Stiefel. Why, sir, that is a fine house. Please do not burn it. Besides, Sergeant Kylo muttered, we ain't got any phosphorus grenades. He had a point. But it took Colonel Stiefel only about 5 minutes to arrive. He held out his hand and said in a heavily accented English, There has been an error, a mistake, let's get on with it, Colonel. The muscles in his face stood out as he stepped back, came to attention, and gave the necessary information. When he had finished, he saluted. I was under orders issued by headquarters to neither shake hands with German officers nor return their salutes. So I turned abruptly and walked away after saying to the interpreter, "Tell them to stack all their weapons and ammunition in front of the middle hangar." For the first time, I noticed a group of about 30 civilians, many of them women and children, standing off to one side of the B-24. The underground leader motioned towards them. "These people came from hell to see you Americans. I hope it was worth the climb." Climb? From hell to Varnas is downhill. Sergeant Kylo straightened it out by explaining that Hell was a small town near the airfield and the mayor would like to say a few words of welcome. It wasn't every day I received greetings from the mayor of Hell, so I shook hands with the sturdy old gentleman and listened to as Kylo interpreted his speech. "This day means as much as the day the war ended, for on this day the Americans come bringing freedom, and this 20th of May will live in our hearts." He went on for several minutes. When he had finished, it was my turn. "Make out a guard duty schedule for the plane," I said to Kylo. "I want a man here around the clock. Use the crew too. We'll take over the colonel's quarters, move our gear and supplies in there. Tell that interpreter to move in too. Supper at 6:30, 10 and 1 rations. Invite the underground, we have plenty, and see if you can scrounge any milk, but make sure it's pasteurized. Tell the radio operator we'll want to send a message in an hour. Now pretend what I've told you is in an answer to the mayor's speech." While the sergeant spoke, I thought again about it being the 20th of May. It was my birthday, a birthday without a present, not even any good wishes. Kylo finished, there was a burst of applause, then a tow-headed little girl ran forward and handed me a bouquet of wildflowers. Colonel Scabo arrived the next day and proceeded to put the fear of God in the United States Army into every German for miles around. His first official visitor was Colonel Stifel, who complained bitterly that I had insulted him during the surrender proceedings. My commanding officer couldn't have been more delighted, but his smile faded as Stifel said, "I demand an apology." Colonel Scabo's hand slammed down on his desk like the crack of doom, and his eyes were blazing as he spat out the words through clenched teeth. "No German will demand anything for a long time." There was one German captain, however, who saw no harm in asking. One of his more bizarre requests was for me to help him get a job with American Airlines. He liked to practice his English on me, usually in long-winded explanations of how he had never been a Nazi. He seemed to be getting a bit hoarse one morning, so I interrupted. "You served as an intelligence officer with the Luftwaffe for the last 4 years, didn't you?" Hauptmann Ott? "That is right, Lieutenant Hall. Tell me, did you ever hear of an outfit called the OSS? But certainly, the Office of Strategic Services, an American group, very clever. We knew all about it. Really? What is it?" "It is the cover story for a real intelligence organization." A week later, Major Colby brought his men down from Nemos, and Norso 1 and 2 were reunited. The first section was in good shape and excellent spirits, although neither group could help but notice the gaps in our ranks at the first formation. Rocky told me about finding the plane in which Blaine Jones and his men had been killed, and how they had been given a military burial in a raging blizzard with the mercury 20 below. Eventually, these men were laid to rest in Cambridge, England, near their comrades who died in the Orkney Islands crash. The British rushed a military government unit to Varnas, so Major Colby turned over command to the area to them, and the Norso group followed Colonel Scabo to Oslo. The commander and Major Axel had also come to town, set up OSS headquarters in an overstuffed mansion, and were busy receiving the adulation of an uninformed public. The occupation was being handled jointly by an Anglo-Norwegian U.S. combine of military and civil authorities, but the American commander didn't have much of a say in things. Everyone was anxious to leave Norway, and get back to London proved much less difficult than we feared it might be. The Norso group left with the enthusiastic help of both the British and Norwegian armies. It embarrassed them to have Bill Colby and his men around while they were handing each other medals for being the first troops to land after the war was over. We arrived back in London and found OSS headquarters almost stripped clean. The boys and girls had moved on to such spots as Paris, Brussels, Copenhagen, and Oslo. Fortunately, there was still enough of the crack Special Operations British administrative staff left to arrange our shipment back to the States, and we had priority orders at that. The Norsel Group was appreciated by General Donovan and his staff, if by no one else, and was much in demand for operations in China.